I entered the world of politics in 1994 after 26 years being in business. I mean, I didn't grow up wanting to be a politician. In fact, my entire education in politics was, I had political science my freshman year of college, and it was from 8 a.m. until 9:15 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I worked late at night, so I slept through half of that. But I decided to run for county commissioner because we were sitting around talking to a group of businessmen and complaining about how things were being done in government. So someone said, if you don't like it, do something about it. So I started looking, so I made the decision to run for county commissioner. And I remember the first person I talked to about a campaign contribution. And they wrote out a check for $1,000, which is the most you could give to somebody. And as he handed me that check, he still had his hand on it. He started proceeding to tell me what I needed to do when I got in office. And I looked at that check and I handed it back to him. I said, you know what, I think I'm going to do this different. He said, what do you mean? He said, I'm not going to take any campaign contributions. He said, you can't win. I said, well, maybe. I said, but I want to go into office without feeling like I owe somebody something. I said, the most important thing you can give me is your vote. So I went out and got a list of people that are registered to vote. I went knocking on doors. I didn't know anything about campaigns. All I knew is that, in business I'd been in sales, and you need to go talk to your customers. So I went out and talked to the voters and told them what I wanted to do. And on election day, I was at the courthouse, and the guy I was running against, his son-in-law was a lawyer. We went to high school and college together, and he wished me luck and got on the elevator and told a mutual friend, he said he won't get 20% of the vote. He's right, I didn't. I got 53. But what was amazing though is they asked me, where's your watch party going to be? And I said, I'm going to be home with my family. My feet are tired. I'm going to be home. We're going to have a nice dinner, and we're going to watch the results on TV, or listen to the radio. And so all night they had us back and forth. The race was the closest race of the night. For a little bit they'd have him ahead, they'd have me ahead. Finally the TV said, in the closest race of the night, it looks like the incumbent commissioner is going to win. And I asked my wife, I said, should I call and congratulate him? So no, why don't you wait a little bit? And about that time I get a phone call from somebody that was at the polls from Cash, said, Gary, you won. All the results came in. And I had call waiting on my phone. All of a sudden the phone started ringing. And as soon as I answered the phone, people were saying, we were behind you all the time, even people that I knew had contributed to my opponent's campaign. And they said, listen, now that the race is over, are you willing to take a campaign contribution? I said, no, that's okay. And I started tallying how many phone calls I had. At 1:45 the last call came in, I had 274 phone calls. And I turned to my wife and said, I've got the same friends tonight that I had this morning. And what was amazing, when I went into office, we go in there and one of the commissioners makes a motion to do something that made no sense to me, and the other one seconded it. And I said, just out of curiosity, why are you guys doing this? This doesn't look like it's the right thing to do. Well, that's the way we always do it. That's what you find in government. They do it because they've always done it that way. The second week I was there, they brought me a bridge inspection report. And there were 129 bridges in my district, and they showed that 59 of them were substandard. And I said, I'm going to put together a plan where I replace the 10 worst bridges during my 4-year term. And someone said, good luck. So most commissioners do somewhere between 4 and 6. So I sat down and I went to Texas to look to see how they built bridges. I went around Oklahoma, I went to Arkansas, and I put down a plan to do that. And we didn't just get 10 bridges built, we got 34, all steel and concrete, the most in the history of the state. Not because I'm a construction guy, not because I'm an engineer, because I'm a businessman. Because I go out and look to see how we can do it better. In fact, we put together a plan that other counties started emulating. We actually got the law changed that allowed us to use restricted funds if we build them ourselves. It said if you have them pre-engineered, they're all steel and concrete and they weigh at least 20 tons, you can do this yourself. A good example of how much that saved is that on a federal project that's paid with federal money, it had to go out for bid. You couldn't build them yourself. But the city of Lawton, we had a project where we had done a 100-foot pre-stressed concrete beam bridge that cost $309,000. So we ended up doing that bridge, the exact same bridge to federal specifications, for $149,000, less than half price. So we showed that things can be done more cost effectively and efficiently. Also, when I came in, we had a county jail that was rated for 97 people. We consistently had 220 to 230 people in it. The judges in the different lawsuits were in said, you better get something done about this. You're going to end up losing a lawsuit and end up paying for a jail and not even have one. So I sat down with the people, brought everybody together and came up with a plan on how we're going to finance it, how we're going to build it and get it done. And we got that done. In economic development, we were looking at trying to bring Bar S into Lawton. I sat down and negotiated the deal that saved the taxpayers of Lawton $3 million over the way it was being done. And so it's a matter of working toward the citizens, and I've always done that. When I became chairman of the Republican Party, I came in, the party was in shambles. We came in, we turned it around, and we did what a party should do. We should register voters, get the activists involved, go out and recruit good candidates. We turned it around from being minorities to supermajorities. And I got on the ballot in 2010 and became part of what was 2 people that were Republicans out of 11 to all 11. You know, when I came in and I won the race as state auditor, I was outspent $150,000 to $850,000. But what my goal was not to have more money, was to have more votes. So I went around talking to people about what I wanted to do, and I got 56% of the vote. I remember I wasn't going to run at that time. You know, I'd been through a statewide race before, and it's very tough. In fact, on November 2nd, which was, on June 10th, was the last day of filing. You filed on a Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Well, June 10th was the last day of filing. The day before, Mary Jane and I had our 3rd grandchild, Olivia. So I'm home there in Lawton, and I come back to Oklahoma City. I go back home that Tuesday afternoon, and we take the 2 older kids to Vacation Bible School. The next morning, I'm sitting there, and Mary Jane says, before you make a decision not to run, I want you to think about this. It's November 3rd, and you just woke up. What are you thinking? And my thought was that the climate is right. I think I could win. I think I'd do a good job. She said, I think you could too. So I made that decision to run. Like I said, outspent $150,000 to $850,000. And when the results came in, like I said, I got 56% of the vote. The next morning, I wake up, and my thought is, I've got to manage this agency. It's 6 months behind on audits. It's got some major problems. So what I did is everybody said, here's a guy that was a former chairman of the Republican Party. He's going to come in and fire all the Democrats and bring in a bunch of Republicans. I said, the last thing I want is a bunch of political hacks working for me in my office. So what I did is I called a guy that had worked 25 years for the state auditor's office, knew more about government auditing than anybody in the state of Oklahoma, a guy named Steve Tinsley. I said, Steve, would you come and help me with the transition? He said, yeah, I think I'd like that. Well, I convinced him to come in and be my deputy auditor. We went around and talked to all the employees and said, you've got a job. If you're willing to work and work with us, you'll have a job. And so what we did is we went through and that was the entire transition. I was a Republican that replaced a Democrat. He was a Democrat that replaced a Republican. And I couldn't tell you today of every employee, I couldn't tell you the registration of 5 people, and I don't care. Because what we do is we hire people that have accounting degrees, we hire people that have experience, and we hire them based on what they know and what their experience is, not who they know for political reasons. And because of that, we've been able to get a whole lot more done. Now, granted, our state has been through some very difficult financial times. When I came in, we had a chief of staff, a public relations person, a legislative liaison, we had administrative assistants. We've eliminated all those positions and turned those into auditors. We now have reduced our spending by $2 million in our agency and are actually getting more audits done. In the first 2.5 years I was there, we cleaned up the entire backlog and got caught up for the first time in the history of the office, because we're running things in a business manner the way people would expect us to do. I remember one time, the second week I'm in office, I get a call from one of our audit managers. And she says, Mr. Jones, you're going to get a phone call from the sheriff. We got this audit. We've got some audit findings in it that the sheriff doesn't like. And this will be the 8th time we've had that. And I said, well, is it material to the audit? She said, yes. I said, do you have supporting documentation? She said, yes, we do. I said, then it's going to stay in the audit. So, well, you'll probably get a phone call. I said, well, I may. Sure enough, about an hour later, I got a call from the sheriff. He said, do you have time to go to lunch? I said, not really. He said, well, can you meet me for breakfast? And I said, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll meet you for coffee. So I go down to the restaurant, and I get there about 30 minutes early, and I order breakfast, and I pay for it. He gets there about 10 minutes before we're supposed to meet. First thing he says, well, let me pick up your tab. I said, that's okay, I've already taken care of it. It's one of those auditor things. He said, let's just cut to the chase. What's it going to take for this finding to go away? I said, real simple. Don't do it next year, and it won't be in next year's audit. He said, "You're kidding." I said, "No, I'm serious." He said, "This is the first time." I said, "No, this is the 8th time and you know it." He said, "This is nothing but a Republican going after a Democrat. This is going to be front page in the paper." I said, "It all depends on how you respond. If your response is, this is political, I'm going after you, it may make front page. If you do what you should do and say that I realize it's a problem and I'll fix it, it may or may not make it to the paper." It made it to page 28 and I don't think anybody ever noticed it. 2 days later, I got a call from that audit manager and she said, "Did you get a phone call?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "Well, what'd you do?" I said, "Well, I had coffee with him." She said, "Oh." She said, "What should I do?" I said, "Leave it in there." She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Leave it in there." She paused for a minute and said, "Hallelujah." You know, and what I tell people is that I don't want you to ever put anything in an audit because of politics, but don't you withhold anything because of politics. Our job is to represent the citizens of Oklahoma. We're the citizens watchdog, and if we don't tell it the way it is, and we let people get by with things, then we're going to find the case that all of a sudden people are embezzling and doing things they shouldn't do. And that's what our job is to watch after it. And you know, it's amazing to me when you sit there and you watch what's going on in the state of Oklahoma with our finances. You know, being a business person, being an accountant, our budget right now is done in such a manner that is not like nothing I've ever seen. You know, if we ran our finances in personally the way government runs finances, we'd all be bankrupt. And I will tell you that I remember something that J.C. Watts said in a town hall meeting back in 1995, right after he got elected to Congress. It was in Lawton at the Carnegie Library. He said when he got out of professional sports, he never dreamed he'd get into a profession that people had bigger egos. And it's amazing. You see that right now. And you know, one of the opponents always refers to us as, you know, those guys are nothing but career politicians. And I said, we're all politicians when we run for office. The question is, can we make the transition from politician to public servant? And I've always been able to do that on the day I got elected. You know, I'm not any better because I've got one more vote on a particular day. In fact, it's one of my pet peeves, and if anybody that follows me on Facebook knows, I hate it when we refer to politicians as honorable just because they got elected. And based on what we're seeing now, there's probably not a profession that's less honorable than politicians. You hate to say that, but that's something you should earn. You know, we work for the citizens of Oklahoma, and we should always be doing the right thing. And but there's so many things that need to be changed. I mean, I did not grow up wanting to be governor. I literally prayed that somebody else would get in this race that I thought understood the situation we're in, were willing to come out and do what's necessary to fix it. But too many times, the decisions that seem to be real easy, when you sit down and analyze what needs to be done, they become very difficult when you look at everything through a political prism. How is it going to affect their political future? And it's time that we have somebody that will stand up and do what's right for Oklahoma and worry more about the future of my kids and my grandkids and your kids and grandkids than they are worried about their own political future. And everybody says that. I mean, it's amazing to me. I've been to candidate forums. I wish we had these things that were lie detectors when you get up and talk and you say something that's not true and the buzzer goes off. Because you sit there and you want to go, that's not true. You know that's not true. Because many times what politicians want to do, and I can tell you, I can sit down and check every box that the candidate needs to say to win a Republican primary. But the problem is we have way too much of that. What we need is people that are willing to tell the truth, even though it may hurt. You know, Dr. Coburn said when he got up to give his announcement that he was running for Senate back in 2004, that we are at risk of being the first generation that leaves the next generation worse off than we found it. But we can fix it. But we can't fix it playing politics, and we're going to have to sacrifice. That means everybody's going to have to sacrifice if we're going to turn around and create an environment that's going to be conducive to our kids and grandkids be able to have the same freedoms and the same opportunities that we've grown up with. Now, I go back and I look, and I feel ashamed of the fact that my generation, you talk about the greatest generation, but you go back and you look at every single generation before us has sacrificed so their kids and grandkids could have a better life. But now what we find on the national level and even on the state level, we're wanting to make the easy decisions as opposed to doing what's right. You know, what I stand for is I believe that we need to have budget reform and finance reform. I believe we need ethics reform. You know, today the Legislative Compensation Committee voted to lower the salary of state representatives from 38,400 down to 35,000. And someone said, what do you think about that? I said, well, think about this. We just now changed the rules that said that where a lobbyist could give up to $100 each year in meals and gifts to each representative, now they can give $500. In fact, a report came out last year that referred to one of the senators as the hungry man because he had gotten so many meals from the lobbyist. We've changed the contribution limits where used to a family could give $5,000 into a race. Now they can give $2,700 per individual in that family for the primary, the runoff, and the general. Which if you have a family of 4, that's about $30,000 instead of $5,000. So we've raised the contribution limits, we've raised the amount lobbyists can do, but we've lowered the salary of the elected officials. What I think we need to do is we need to make that number that the lobbyists can give to candidates or to elected officials to 0. So that way people are more responsive to the citizens of Oklahoma and less responsive to the special interest and the lobbyist. And this isn't something I've been talking about just this year. You know, the Tulsa world referred to me as a curmudgeonly penny pincher who doesn't have many friends in high places because I tell it the way I see it. And someone said, I can't believe they said that about you. I said, listen, as an auditor, that's the ultimate compliment. but, you know, what we have to have is we have to have somebody that has the best interest of the citizens and not the interest of the special interests. So with that, I think I probably talked all you can stand, and, you know, but I'll answer any questions you might have. So thank you very much. Well, the first thing you need to understand is how we got in this situation. 20 years ago, the state income tax was 7%. Now it's been lowered to 5%. For every quarter-cent reduction in income tax, it's $160 million. You take 8 quarters, that's $1.28 billion. We've lowered the gross protection tax from 7% down to 2% for the first 3 years. And I know that some of the information they put out, they said there's only 900 wells that are at the 2% rate, and there's something like 60,000 wells at the 7% rate. Those 900 wells represent 53% of all the oil production in Oklahoma. They project that there's $12 billion worth of oil and gas that should come out of the ground this next year. So you lower that percentage from 7% down to 2%. Beginning of this year, I came up with a plan that I called the 555 plan. The state income tax was at 5%, but there's another trigger that would take it down to 4.85. So I said, freeze it at 5%, don't let it go down. Take the gross production tax to 5% for the first 3 years and after that across the board, which generates $209 million more. And then once the price goes up, then go ahead and put it up to 7%, put 1% into educational stabilization fund, 1% into the rainy day fund, so you can actually balance out the shortfalls. I'm the one candidate on the Republican Party that will admit we have both a revenue problem and a spending problem. We have a revenue problem because we've cut the revenues by $2 billion, but we've only cut expenses by $1.1 billion. Leaves you a $900 million shortfall. We can go in and we can look at efficiencies and do performance audits, which I've been trying to do for 7 years. I've been blocked by the legislature for 7 years to having the authority and the resources to do that. We can go in and do performance audits, like we do some, but what you do when you do performance audits, you don't always find savings. For instance, we did a performance audit on corrections, and what we said there was that you need to invest more money in it. The guards are underpaid. There's too few of them. They're working overtime. The infrastructure is a disaster. The computer systems are antiquated. And so you need to fix that if you're going to turn around and change the trend and try to bring the cost of corrections down. But that being said, I think we can generate by doing a reset and setting a same fair rate across the board at 5%. Now, in addition to those, I think we ought to put a 5% tax on the generation of wind energy. We made a huge investment in wind, and if you can make a huge investment over a period of time, it's time we get a return back. But you do that across the board at 5%, you can generate $450 to $500 million by coming in and finding efficiencies by going to do performance audits. In fact, I got stopped by Preston Dorflinger, the director of the Office of Management Enterprise Services. They don't like to be called OMES. We call it one big mess. But he came to me and said, great article in the Washington Times. I said, Preston, what are you talking about? He said, you're quoted throughout this article in the Washington Times. I said, Preston, I haven't talked to anybody at the Washington Times since I was on the RNC. He said, let me send you this article. So he emails me that article, and it goes through and says, Governor Fallon's auditor, Gary Jones, has proposed a needs-based budgeting formula, which is a great way to do budgets, eliminate waste and inefficiencies, because the budgets are based on what's needed to operate, not what historically has been done. And then it goes through and quotes me from an op-ed that I did that went out to about 50 different newspapers. And the last line, it said, Washington, are you listening? The problem is we're not doing it in Oklahoma. And what the needs-based budgeting is where you go in and do zero-based budgeting, build your budget from zero, and then you do performance audits to come back and make sure it's being done cost-effectively and efficiently on a rotating basis. And that combination makes up needs-based budgeting, which is what I have come up with. And it's a great way of doing it. The problem is we're not doing it. We don't do zero-based budgeting anymore. In fact, we don't do it anymore. We never did it in Oklahoma. So that way you can determine the inefficiencies and find the waste. And you can also go through and look and see, like in some cases right now, the problems we're having at the health department. If they had done that, that would have been caught on year one. This problem is drug out for 5 or 6 years. So that's what we need to do with the budget, and make sure that we put, right now the way it's done now is the Office of Management Enterprise Services works with each agency to come up with the budget. And that becomes the governor's executive budget. And then the House starts doing the budget, the Senate starts doing the budget. Now, so if you have 3 different sets of numbers, at least 2 of them are wrong. More than likely, they're all 3 wrong. But if you have a one budget office, and you get the numbers correct and you provide those numbers to everybody, you don't have to have 3 different, it's not just duplication, it's triplication. And you make sure that the people are doing exactly what they need to do to provide the information to the House, the Senate, and the governor so we can make those decisions. Once we do that and get professionals doing the budget instead of politicos doing the budget, I mean, 2 years ago, the person doing the budget in the Senate had 2 degrees, music and political science. We now have a budget director that has a political science degree. So, I mean, you need the professionals doing that and put those in place. And not only can I do a budget, but when it comes time to negotiate the budget, I'll be the person in that room negotiating the budget. I don't have to have somebody else in there explaining the numbers to me. Because what we see is those numbers are so big, you put them on a spreadsheet. How many of you have seen those pictures where you have to get them just in focus to see what it is? That's what we see so many times. Those numbers are so big, people start looking at that, they can't quite get it in focus. You know, us numbers nerds, as financial people, we look at a spreadsheet and going, look at that, and they're going, what are you looking at? I don't see it. Well, we see it instantly because that's what we do. We deal with the numbers, and to us, those numbers mean something. And if you don't understand that, it's going to be extremely difficult to do a budget. Well, the first thing I'll do is I'll let educators educate instead of try to micromanage. We get so many people that get one more vote on a particular day and they think they're instant experts on everything. We have a major problem with funding in education. And I am fed up, and a lot of people are fed up too, with this idea that our number one priority is to give teacher a pay raise. We can't figure out how to do it. The way you do it is you do what we're supposed to do. If education is our number one priority, the law says that education is supposed to be funded by April 1st each year. They passed that law in 2004 and they've hit that goal one time. That means every year they violated the law. What we will do, instead of having an omnibus budget where everybody comes behind closed doors in the last 2 weeks of session, and then there's a white puff of smoke comes out and they announce we have a budget, and then it's take it or leave it, you know, up or down. What we will do is we will do individual budgets on every agency that's over $100 million. We'll do education first. We'll fund a teacher's pay raise, because the problem right now is that we're losing good teachers all the time, and the thing that's in the long term right now, we're seeing fewer and fewer students go into education. The problem's going to get worse unless we fix it. We have to show education we care. So we do that, we fund that, and then what we do is we come together and work to see if we can reduce some of the administrative costs to make sure the dollars are spent more efficiently and wisely in getting down to the classrooms. But we've got to show education that we care. We've got to show them that there's a clear path to the future, and we've got to let teachers teach and quit trying to tell them what to do. Let me say one other thing too. One of the other things I want to do too is that so many years we push kids to go to college, whether they want to go to college or not. I think what we need more is a European type model that says that we encourage those kids that don't know what to do to go into a career path, to go in to be an electrician, a plumber, a welder. And that way, and what we find many times is kids that go to college end up going to those later and they end up running a $50,000 student loan up and try to have to pay it off. Well, this way, let's encourage them to go into the professions and train our students in the jobs that are available out there so they can go right in that and get internships and apprenticeships, and instead of encouraging them to go to college if they don't want to go. They can always go to college later. In fact, my daughter's a perfect example of that. You know, she had a 4 in high school and lost her scholarship right off the bat. At the time, my brother-in-law and I owned a school that taught nursing, taught LPNs. And I said, Kelly, you're going to be an LPN. She said, I don't want to be. I said, no, you're going to go be an LPN because after that, you're going to figure out what you want to do because you're on your own. So after that, she did that. She liked it. And she thought she wanted to be an RN, but she got married and had her grandson and was trying to work at night and go to school. And she came back and said, Daddy, I know I messed up now. I really wanted to be a teacher. It would work out a whole lot better, so I'm going to give you one more chance. And she went back. She had to get 2 semesters of 4 to even get in the teaching program. She's made a 4 ever since that. She's a fantastic teacher, but she had to get that motivation. And I would tell you, getting out there working is a good motivation for going back and go to school. Well, what I believe that the role state government plays in economic development is that they need to set the stage and have a level playing field out there that provides the opportunity for businesses to come in. We've got to fix the financial problems. We've got to fix the problems with teachers in order to be attractive for people to come in right now. We have businesses in Oklahoma that are thinking twice before they expand their businesses because they don't know whether or not the teaching situation and the financial situation in Oklahoma is on a steady plane right now. People that look at coming into Oklahoma are saying, I'm thinking twice about that. We need to fix those problems and do that first and then have a playing field that sets an environment that businesses want to come here and locate here. But this idea that we're going to give these huge tax credits and pick winners and losers, we've shown that it's not a winning formula. And so I think what we need to do is make sure that we level the playing field for everybody and provide those businesses to come in and let them know they're welcome to come in Oklahoma. We actually were asked to do a performance audit on corrections. And when we went in there, originally they thought that the Department of Corrections was hoarding money, that they had extra money that they could save and spend somewhere else. What we found was, like I said earlier, that the prison guards are underpaid, the infrastructure was collapsing. And what we also found is that while we call it the Department of Corrections, it's really just a warehouse. We're not treating them. We found many people that had alcohol and drug problems, had mental health problems that weren't being treated. So what we have to do is we have to go in there and we have to figure out how we can change that trend. We're #1 in the world in incarceration of women. I don't think we had the meanest women in the world. But we're #2 right now in men, and we're getting ready to be #1, which means the one thing that we'll be #1 in the nation on is something we should not be. But in order to fix that, we've got to come back, and we're putting people in prison that we're mad at, where we probably should get them treatment, and you still punish them. But we need to get them treatment. We need to have programs, because if we don't do that, then the number of people going into the prison is going to continue to rise, and the costs are going to continue to rise. So what we basically said was, instead of being tough on crime, we need to focus on being smart on crime, which means we've got to get mental health and drug treatment down lower so these kids don't get hooked on drugs or they don't become part of the correction system. And we've got to also, once we get them into the system, we've got to get them trained. You know, when we send a mother to prison, more than likely, are we not just incurring the cost of incarcerating her, we're incurring the cost of taking care of her kids through the foster system. But if we can turn that around, and there are treatment programs out there, there are faith-based organizations out there who will work with us. We need to do everything we can and work, and I'm a firm believer that you don't want to be the guy that invented the wheel. In fact, I said this, the person that invented the wheel probably was broke by the time they're through, and the next person made a fortune off of it. So what we need to do is we need to go out there and look at other states and other models out there. Texas has closed 4 prisons in the last 5 years. And we've got a guy that actually helped develop that plan in Joe Albaugh. Joe wants to do this. He's willing to do this. He's a great asset to us, but we've got to give him the tools necessary to do this, to turn that trend, to make it where we can start sending fewer people to prison, and better yet, fewer people will return to prison because they've now become productive citizens. Because if we don't treat them and treat their mental illness, and we don't treat their drug addictions, we're going to be dealing with in prison, or we're going to be dealing with the situations we found in some of these communities where they've gone out and massacred people. Because they need that treatment, and we've got to make sure that we do that. So, there are several programs that the federal government has that I think have been beneficial to the state of Oklahoma, and we need to work together to make sure that we maximize. Number one, it's our dollars coming home. You know, there are no such thing as federal dollars. The dollars that come out of our pockets and go to the federal government and come back. So I think what we need to do, excuse me, we need to make sure that we maximize our efforts to make sure those monies are spent the most efficient ways, that people that qualify for those programs have those programs available. We also need to make sure that those people do indeed qualify, that we're not spending money for people that don't qualify for those. You know, and whether it's transportation or education or social services, you know, I think we also need to look at health care. You know, we don't know what's going to happen now in the federal government, so we got to work with them very closely to see what's going to happen and determine whether or not that's a proper use of those funds. But you also have to do is make sure that, like you would in any business deal that you do, you've got to start looking at what is the benefit of the funds coming in, but what's the obligation that we have of those, and what's the ultimate cost going to be, and does the benefits outride the cost? Because there's a lot of matching funds there sometimes. And sometimes you'll see people will run out there and try to qualify for a particular program because there's money, but then they find out that they've got a lot bigger cost than what the benefit is on what they have to match. So we got to balance that. The other thing too is we are a sovereign state. There's certain things that we have, rights we have as our state, but we have a partnership with the federal government. And so we need to work together to make sure that what we do is in the best interest of Oklahomans, and that we don't just automatically jump into something because it's available. Well, budget policies are basically a partnership, or it's a combination of the governor, the House, and the Senate, because a bill has to come out to be passed. It has to be initiated in the House, passed through the Senate, and the governor ultimately signs it. But what I believe is the governor should take the lead on this. You know, what I want to do is come together and work together on a budget to see what we agree in common and work from there. And the governor can play a lot bigger role in helping develop that policy than in the past. And many times they let the House and the Senate take those leads. And what we find now is that there's a handful of people that are really making the decisions. While you think that you send your representative up there and they're going to have an equal say-so because it takes the same number of people to elect your state representatives to your state senator, the structure is such that a handful of people make those decisions. I want to open up that process. In fact, I want the House and the Senate to be subject to open meetings and open records like everybody else, so people can see what's going on, they see the process, and have those open debates on those budgets on each item, so people will know who's for something, who's against it, and you'll have an opportunity to make amendments and discuss it and vote on it. That's something we're not doing today, but I think it needs to be a more open, transparent process. Well, I think as far as education, it is my number one priority. But no matter what your priority is, right now it all depends on the budget. So the first priority would be is that when I get elected, I won't wait until it's getting sworn in to start working. The very next day, I'll call the leaders in the House, the Senate, Democrat and Republican, and I'll tell them, you come ready to work and plan on spending the whole day. And when you get there, I'm going to tell you, check your egos at the door. Because folks, we're going to sit down and work. And what we're going to do is we're going to collectively come together and figure out what we all agree on. Instead of sitting there arguing back and forth about what we disagree on, let's talk about what we agree on, what we want to accomplish. And once we come together on that, I said, folks, this is what we're going to get done. All this other stuff, we're not going to spend all of our time arguing over what's far right, far left, because the people of Oklahoma want us to get things accomplished. Because if you come to me with some of this crazy stuff that's coming up right now, I'll veto every bill you've got and get us back on track. And they said, well, you can't do that because the governor only has one vote. No, the governor's one vote is a veto. And if you do that, I said, all I have to have is 1/3 of one body to keep that override of veto. And I'll tell you right now, there are at least half the people up there that truly want to get something accomplished, truly want to come together, both Democrats and Republicans, that don't want to play those political games. So if we do that and we sit down and say, okay, let's see what we can do for education. Let's see what we can do for roads and bridges. Let's see what we can do for public health, mental health, and focus on the core services and not play in the fringes, but focus on those main things we agree on, then we can actually get something accomplished. There are actually federal laws about that says that so I believe that I will support the law. And so if people are violating the law, I think that should be reported. And so it's up to the federal government on most of those things. I believe in school choice. I believe you have the right to send kids to whatever education system you want to. But I also believe that the first obligation is to support public education, and I'll do that first. And that we'll make sure that public education is funded first and foremost before we start siphoning money off to something else. The answer to that, of course, is no. I mean, the severity of the crime should determine the punishment, and so that's what we need to look at. And in many cases, what we find is that, as we went through doing our audit on corrections, we found that the length of sentencing many times had more to do with where they got sentenced than the crime. And so you need to make sure that we have some sentencing guidelines that are more in line with what the severity of the crime is. Because what happens is some people want to go out there and say, I'm going to be tough on crime, I'm going to do this and this and this. And, if you do something that is a penalty longer, a sentence longer than what they should get, then ultimately you're not just penalizing them, you're penalizing the citizens. So we need to make sure that we have programs by which if they have addictions, they can get treated. Going to jail, maybe not the solution. Getting them treatment and allowing them to stay there, taking care of their families and going to work, I think is a better alternative. I know when I was county commissioner, we had a lot of people that we'd go pick up the pre-release prisoners, and we would go pick them up to have them come work for us. And in many cases, you could not tell the difference between them and our workers. They got convicted of a drug crime and they're in prison for 10 years. If we had work programs, if we had monitor programs, we'd be better off on those low-level crimes to monitoring them. Even if we have to go pick them up, take them to work, it's a whole lot less expensive and a whole lot more productive doing that than it is putting them in behind bars and warehousing them for a period of time. And the other thing too right now is prisons are criminal U. I mean, a lot of times somebody goes in for a low-level offense and they come out a more hardened criminal because they've learned it in prison. So let's make sure that we match the crime up with the punishment. Well, first thing we need to do is we need to look at added value. We're an agriculture state and we're also an energy state. If we can have added value where we can build on those resources, I think we ought to look at maybe having a refinery in Oklahoma. We have the biggest crossroads of all the oil coming in through the state of Oklahoma. Maybe we should look at trying to get a permit to have a refinery. We should look at doing, I forget what it's called, where you take natural gas and you convert it to liquid fuel. It's not methane, but there's a term for it. And you can do that and you have liquid natural gas. And those are the things that we need to look at producing. And then also, we need to create that environment for other businesses to come in. Too many times we try to fit a square peg in a round hole. We go out and try to get a business to come into Oklahoma that really doesn't fit. We provide them a huge incentive to do that. Instead, what we need to do is we need to match up our resources. We have 3 different interstates that come across the state. We're in the center of the nation. So we need to look and see what businesses would be natural fits here, and to go out and sell Oklahoma for what natural assets we have. We have low energy, we have a hard-working workforce, we're centrally located, and so we need to match that up and encourage other businesses to grow. And then also a lot of businesses in Oklahoma that are growing. A friend of mine is big in the buffalo business. I mean, he was in real estate, and he now has developed a market where he sells buffalo meat all over the country out of Comanche County. I mean, some of the top restaurants in Dallas are now selling his buffalo meat, and because he's gone out and developed the market. Those are different type of things that we can do that match up with what natural assets we have in Oklahoma. A few years ago, how many of you read about 2 years ago the article that talked about the huge raises that certain agencies gave while they're telling everybody else to cut back? I think in many cases what we found is that we have, in some cases, I mean, when you're giving $20, $30, $40, $60,000 raises to certain people, and you're telling other people that we don't have enough money for you for a raise. I think we need to come back and do everything we can to make things cost effective and efficient. We've gone from 128 employees down to 107. And we've done that in a manner that we're getting just as many audits done. Our quality has not gone down. Because the Governor Fallon said 3 years ago we should focus on eliminating 10% of all the non-mission critical expenses. I said no. We should focus on eliminating 100% of the non-mission critical expenses. If it's not critical to the mission, we shouldn't be spending it. But we can do that, and we can do things more cost effectively, more efficiently. The other thing that we can do is that I believe that we're at a point in time now that we can no longer afford all the government we have. So what we have to do is prioritize. And we have to make sure that, is this a core service of government? Instead of cutting budgets across the board where you're hurting everything and you're hurting core services, there are some things down the lower level of priority that we need to look at cutting out. Do we need to continue doing this? Some of the tax credits we're giving, we're not getting a fair return on our investment. Why are we doing that? And I think that's what we have to do, is we have to focus on delivering core services and do it in the most cost-effective, efficient manner. They now created the Office of Management Enterprise Services, which is a conglomeration of all these different offices. They don't like to be called OMS. We call them one big mess. But you've now added extra layers of bureaucracy and called it consolidation. That's not consolidation. I've actually merged with other companies, and the way you save money there is you do away with duplication of overhead, duplication of all these expenses, but if you're just adding extra bureaucracy, you're just adding to the cost. So there are things that we can do. For instance, someone said, how do you reduce the administrative cost of education? I don't think that we ought to close small schools. I mean, my grandkids go to Chattanooga, and someone said, well, the superintendent of Chattanooga makes $200 and something for every kid. But not only is he the superintendent, he's the principal. He mows the grass. He drives a bus. And up until last year, he was the basketball coach. But Chattanooga is an A-rated school. There are kids now that have left Chattanooga. They're leaders in this state. There's kids from Chattanooga, Oklahoma. They're leaders in this country. Bart Fisher, our neighbor, is now one of the top agriculture guys, has his doctorate. He wrote the Ag Bill in Washington. So what you find is that some of the best students come out of the small schools. That's not our problem. What we should do is focus on eliminating the administrative cost. I think we have the perfect setup. Vermont has a model out there that's called supervisory unions. They have 8 or 10 school districts that feed into a hub. They do the administrative costs there to save and are a lot more efficient in the administrative cost and functions. And we can do the same thing in Oklahoma because all of our schools feed into a career tech. So let's use the assets of career tech to do this to help offset those costs and get more money out to the classroom. Those are the type of things that we can save money. We can also do, like sometimes there's a half-empty bus that goes to career tech, and there's kids out there that want to take advanced classes. They have to get online to do it. Why not put those kids on the bus and go to career tech too and have those mega learning centers at career tech? And I think that's a way that we can have a more efficient, more effective education and save money. Well, all those different things like that. We in our office, we don't buy ink pens anymore, we buy refills. An ink pen costs $1.99, a refill costs 79 cents. We negotiated our contract with Xerox, and they came back and said, based on the number of color copies you make, we're going to give you free black and white copies, but you have to pay for the color copies. Well, guess what? You have to get written permission to make a color copy in my office now. They estimate our bill was going to be $700 a month. It's now $200 a month. And that's what we have to do, is make sure that everything we're doing is the most cost-effective and efficient. And are there things that we are currently doing that we can no longer afford? But they have to be the lower priority. If you do across-the-board cuts, you're going to hurt everybody, but you got to focus on, we're going to fund core services at the proper level. And then if there's things down there we're doing, those are the things we'll cut out. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to come here, and I will tell you that I am not a politician, I'm a public servant. I take tremendous pride in the fact that every job I've had, that I look at how I can make it better. I'm also a problem solver. And folks, we're facing a lot of problems in Oklahoma. And I've had the ability to go in and analyze a problem, come up with a solution, and get that problem implemented, working with others to get it done. And the biggest problem we're facing in the state of Oklahoma right now is our financial problem. The question is, who has the ability to fix it? If you find yourself in a financial problem in business, you don't call in the public relations people, you don't call in the salesmen. You don't call in the attorneys until you're ready to file bankruptcy. You call in the auditors and the accountants, say, how bad is it and how do we get out of it? Well, that's me. Someone said, what sets you apart different from the other people? I said, number one is that I'm running to be governor for everybody, not for special interests. I will not have the most money. In fact, I'll probably have one of the least. But my goal is to get more ones on election day, and every single one of you counts one. And the other thing too is they said, well, what do you think sets you apart? I said, what we're facing right now in state government is like a giant jigsaw puzzle. You got all the pieces, you got the budget and finance, you've got the different agencies and what they do, how they interact with counties and cities and schools and the federal government. So all we're going to have to sit down and figure out how we're going to work out this jigsaw puzzle. The difference between me and everybody else, I know what the picture should look like. So I'm not out there blindly trying to put pieces together. I understand what the picture should look like. So I can start on day one solving the problems we have. Everybody else is going to have a learning curve. There's 3 different people running for governor who have come up to me and said, Gary, we think if you were in charge of state finance, we would not be in this financial position. So what we need is somebody like you or you running state finance. So I said, what you're saying is you think the people should hire you, so you should hire somebody like me. Why don't we just let them cut out the middleman and let the people hire me? So with that, I'd love to have your support and love to have your vote. So thank you very much.